Usain Bolt finds his former coach homeless, and his response makes everyone cry. The Kingston air was thick with humidity as Usain Bolt's rented SUV slowed to a stop outside the faded chain-link fence. He sat motionless for a moment, studying the overgrown track where his legend had begun 20 years earlier. After years of international stardom, endorsement deals, and global adulation, something had drawn him back to this forgotten corner of Jamaica. "You sure this is the place?" asked his assistant, checking the navigation app on his phone. Bolt nodded slowly. "Yeah, this is where it all started." The once proud track was barely recognizable. Weeds pushed through cracked asphalt, the lane markings nearly invisible beneath years of neglect. The modest bleachers where parents had once cheered now tilted at precarious angles, victims of tropical storms and abandonment. Bolt stepped from the car, ignoring his designer shoes sinking into the mud. His fingers traced the rusted gate, finding the familiar latch that had never quite closed properly. The hinges protested as he pushed through, stepping onto what remained of the track. "I used to run 10 miles here before school," he said quietly, more to himself than his assistant. Coach would be waiting at 5 in the morning every morning, rain or shine. Memories flooded back as he walked the curve of what had once been lane 4, his preferred lane. There, the starting blocks had been bolted down. There, the finish line had stood. There, in that small concrete building, Coach had kept his sparse office with its metal desk and wall of faded newspaper clippings. As Bolt retraced his adolescent footsteps, a slender man with a camera approached cautiously. "Mr. Bolt, I'm Darian Morris from the Kingston Herald. I heard you might be visiting. Would you mind answering a few questions about coming back?" Bolt's security detail moved to intervene, but he waved them off with a gentle hand. "It's fine." The interview began casually, with Bolt explaining his impromptu visit while pointing out landmarks only he could still see beneath the overgrowth. "And Coach Jenkins," the reporter asked, "he was instrumental in your early development, wasn't he?" Bolt's expression softened. "Coach believed in me when I was just a skinny kid with bad posture. He'd say, 'Usain, God gave you a Ferrari body, but you're driving it like an old pickup truck.' He taught me everything, not just how to run, but how to be a man, how to handle pressure, how to remember where you came from." The reporter shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at his notes. "You haven't heard then?" "Heard what?" "About Coach Jenkins." Bolt froze, the smile fading from his face. "No." "What about him?" The reporter hesitated. "He had some financial troubles a few years back. Medical bills, I think. His wife left, then the bank took his house. Nobody's seen him around in official circles for years." The words hit Bolt like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Someone would have told me. My foundation would have." "He refused help from anyone in the sports community," the reporter continued. "Pride, they say. There were rumors he was living rough somewhere in Spanish Town, but nobody knows for sure." That night, in his hotel suite overlooking the Kingston harbor, sleep eluded Bolt. The ceiling fan spun lazily above, but his mind raced faster than he'd ever run. Images of Coach Jenkins flickered through his consciousness, the stern voice masking genuine care, the stopwatch perpetually hanging from his neck, the way he'd press his lips together when pleased, but trying not to show it. Bolt reached for his phone at 3 a.m., scrolling through contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. "Marcus, it's Usain. I need your help with something important. It's about Coach Jenkins." As dawn broke over Kingston, Usain Bolt had already set in motion a search that would change more lives than just his own. 2 days into his search, Bolt realized finding one man in a country of nearly 3 million would be harder than he'd anticipated. Despite his celebrity status opening many doors, Coach Jenkins had apparently vanished into the margins of society, where even fame couldn't easily penetrate. Bolt started at the coach's last known address, a modest bungalow now occupied by a young family who knew nothing of its previous owner. The neighborhood had changed, with many original residents moving on as property values shifted and generations turned over. At the local high school where Jenkins had once worked, a secretary in her 60s remembered him fondly. Such dedication. "And to those boys," she said, adjusting her glasses. "When the school cut the track program's funding, he bought equipment with his own money. Even drove some of the boys home after practice when their parents couldn't." "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" Bolt asked. "The last I heard, he was staying with his cousin in Spanish Town after the bank took his house. That was maybe 5 years ago. The cousin's house turned out to be another dead end. A neighbor said the man had died 3 years earlier, but didn't know what had happened to Jenkins afterward." Bolt worked methodically, keeping his investigation quiet to avoid media attention. His security team was minimized, and he traded his distinctive vehicles for nondescript rentals. The last thing he wanted was to turn this personal mission into a publicity stunt. On the 4th day, he visited a community center where retired coaches sometimes gathered. An elderly man recognized Jenkins from Bolt's description, but hadn't seen him in years. "Check by the harbor," the man suggested. "Some of the guys who fall on hard times end up there, doing odd jobs for the fishing boats." The harbor yielded nothing, but a dockworker mentioned a homeless encampment beneath the highway overpass where Spanish Town Road crossed the waterfront industrial area. As Bolt's car approached the area the following morning, the gleaming high-rises of New Kingston gave way to warehouses and repair shops. The underside of the overpass was a patchwork of makeshift shelters, tarpaulins, cardboard, and scavenged materials providing minimal protection from the elements. Bolt instructed his driver to circle the area slowly. His eyes scanned each figure, looking for something familiar in their bearing or features. Most were younger men, some clearly struggling with addiction. Others appeared to be laborers between jobs, with calloused hands and weathered faces. None resembled the proud, straight-backed man who had transformed Bolt's raw speed into championship form. A week into the search, frustration mounted. Bolt expanded his efforts, hiring 2 retired police officers to make discreet inquiries throughout the Kingston metropolitan area. They compiled a list of places where Jenkins might seek shelter or assistance: churches, soup kitchens, day labor sites. Meanwhile, Bolt revisited his old neighborhood, speaking with anyone who might remember the coach. Each conversation added fragments to the puzzle. Jenkins had suffered a heart attack 5 years ago. Medical bills had drained his modest savings. His wife had returned to her family in Montego Bay. Too proud to ask for help, he had gradually sold everything he owned. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Stopped at a traffic light in a busy downtown intersection, Bolt noticed a thin man with a handwritten cardboard sign standing at the median. Something about the man's posture, even in apparent defeat, there was dignity in how he held his shoulders, caught Bolt's attention. Though the man's beard was grey and unkempt, though his clothes were worn and his frame gaunt, there was something achingly familiar in his profile. Bolt's eyes widened in recognition just as the light changed and his driver started to move forward. "Stop! Stop the car!" Bolt shouted. The driver slammed on the brakes, causing a chorus of horns behind them. Bolt was already opening his door, stepping into traffic, ignoring the danger and commotion. The man with the sign looked up, startled by the disruption. His eyes, once sharp and assessing, eyes that had studied Bolt's form for flaws thousands of times, now appeared sunken and weary, but they widened in shock as Bolt approached. Recognition dawned in those tired eyes, followed immediately by shame. Coach Jenkins looked away, his shoulders hunching as if trying to disappear. "Coach," Bolt said, his voice barely audible above the traffic noise. "It's me. It's Usain." The old coach's hands trembled, still gripping his cardboard sign that asked simply for work, not handouts. When he finally spoke, his voice was a shadow of the commanding tone that had once directed champions. "You shouldn't see me like this, Usain. You should remember me as I was." Traffic continued flowing around them, drivers honking and shouting at the obstruction until they recognized the tall figure standing in their midst. One by one, cars slowed. Phones emerged from windows to capture the unfolding scene. Bolt stood, frozen, a storm of emotions crossing his face: shock, grief, anger, and finally determination. Without warning, he dropped to one knee in front of his former coach, taking the weathered hands in his own. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Bolt said, his voice breaking. Jenkins tried to pull away, embarrassment evident in every tense muscle. "Please, Usain, go on now. I don't need your pity." "Pity?" Bolt shook his head firmly. "This isn't a pity, coach. This is respect. This is family." A small crowd had begun to gather, keeping a respectful distance but watching intently. Someone recognized Jenkins from his coaching days and whispered his name. The whisper spread through the onlookers. "Come with me," Bolt said, rising to his feet but not releasing the coach's hand. "Just to talk, that's all I'm asking." For a moment, Jenkins seemed ready to refuse. His pride, the same pride that had kept him from reaching out when his world collapsed, warred visibly with his exhaustion. Finally, he gave a single, reluctant nod. The image of Usain Bolt guiding his frail former coach to a waiting car was captured by dozens of phones. Within hours, the photos spread across social media, then to news outlets. By nightfall, the story had circled the globe. The world's fastest man on his knees before a homeless man who had shaped his destiny. Bolt took Jenkins to a small hotel on the outskirts of Kingston, away from media attention. He personally helped the older man into the modest room, then ordered a meal from the hotel restaurant. "When was the last time you ate properly?" Bolt asked, watching Jenkins eye the food with both hunger and hesitation. "I manage," Jenkins replied evasively, though his gaunt frame told a different story. As they ate, the initial awkwardness gradually gave way to reminiscence. Jenkins recalled Bolt's early races, the technical adjustments they'd worked on, the impromise he had shown even as a gangly teenager. For brief moments, the years seemed to fall away from the coach's face as he gestured with his hands, demonstrating the arm position he had drilled into young Bolt. "Why didn't you call me?" Bolt finally asked, the question that had burned in him since learning of Jenkins's situation. "After everything we went through, why suffer alone?" Jenkins set down his fork, his momentary animation fading. "Your number changed. I tried once, years ago. You could have reached me through the Federation, through my foundation, and say—" "What?" Jenkins interrupted, a flash of his old force returning. "That the man who trained champions was a failure? That I couldn't even keep a roof over my head?" He shook his head firmly. "I taught you to stand on your own 2 feet. I had to." "Live by those same words," Bolt leaned forward. "You also taught me that a team lifts each other up, that no one succeeds alone." As the evening progressed, Bolt outlined a proposal. He wanted to purchase and renovate the abandoned track facility where they had first worked together. He wanted Jenkins to help run it, not as charity, but as a paid position utilizing his expertise to train a new generation. "I don't want your money, Usain," Jenkins said stubbornly. "It's not my money I'm offering," Bolt replied. "It's a partnership. Those kids in Trelawney and Spanish Town need what you gave me, someone who sees their potential before they see it themselves." Jenkins stared out the window for a long while before responding. "Let me think about it." By morning, videos of their roadside reunion had gone viral. Bolt's phone buzzed constantly with messages from former teammates, sponsors, and media outlets. Old students of Jenkins called radio stations with stories of his impact on their lives. A local newspaper published a feature on his coaching career, featuring grainy photos of a younger Jenkins beside teenage athletes, including a lanky, grinning Bolt. The hotel lobby filled with reporters. Bolt agreed to a brief statement with one condition: no photographs or questions directed at Jenkins. Standing before the cameras, Bolt spoke with raw emotion. "Coach Jenkins gave everything he had to athletes like me. He worked before dawn and after dark. He used his own money when the school couldn't provide equipment. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Bolt paused, collecting himself. "Now it's our turn to show him that his work mattered, that he matters. Not because of me or my career, but because of who he is and what he's given to Jamaica." Behind the scenes, Bolt had already made calls to his attorney about purchasing the abandoned track facility. By afternoon, initial paperwork was underway. He contacted former sponsors, many of whom expressed immediate interest in supporting the project, recognizing both its humanitarian appeal and marketing potential. As public interest in the story intensified, Jenkins gradually accepted that his situation had become a catalyst for something larger than himself. Over a quiet dinner that evening, he finally agreed to Bolt's proposal with one condition of his own. "This can't be about me," he insisted. "It has to be about the kids, about the future." Bolt smiled, extending his hand across the table. "That's exactly what you always taught me, Coach. Always look forward, never back." Their handshake, captured by a hotel guest and shared online, became the second viral image of their reunion. But it would not be the last. 3 weeks after their chance encounter, the transformation began. Heavy equipment rolled through the broken gates of the abandoned track facility, clearing decades of overgrowth and debris. Structural engineers assessed the crumbling bleachers and decrepit buildings. Architects drafted plans for a modern training center that would honor the site's humble origins while providing state-of-the-art facilities. Bolt insisted on preserving certain elements: the exact dimensions of the original track, the placement of the starting blocks, the small office where Jenkins had mentored generations of runners. These would remain as reminders of what could be accomplished with determination and guidance, even without fancy equipment or resources. Meanwhile, Jenkins underwent a transformation of his own. After initial medical assessments revealed untreated hypertension and malnutrition, he began a carefully monitored recovery program. A barber trimmed his wild beard, revealing the strong jawline remembered by his former athletes. New clothes replaced his tattered garments, though he insisted on nothing flashy or expensive. Most importantly, Jenkins started counseling sessions to address the depression that had accompanied his downward spiral. Initially resistant, he gradually opened up about the shame and isolation that had prevented him from seeking help. "I was supposed to be the strong one," he admitted to Bolt after a particularly difficult session. "The one with all the answers." "Even coaches need coaches sometimes," Bolt replied simply. Word of the project spread through the local community. Former athletes coached by Jenkins volunteered their time. Construction workers offered additional hours without pay. Children from nearby neighborhoods pressed their faces against the fence, watching as their dilapidated playground transformed into something extraordinary. Bolt established a foundation to oversee the project, ensuring its sustainability beyond initial enthusiasm. Corporate sponsors provided funding in exchange for modest recognition, but Bolt was firm that the facility would primarily serve local youth with limited resources. 4 months after construction began, a sign was erected at the entrance: Speed and Hope Training Center. Beneath these words, in smaller letters, "Because someone believed in us first." Jenkins, health improved and spirit rekindled, spent hours walking the emerging facility, offering suggestions based on decades of experience. His expertise proved invaluable as the project evolved from concept to reality. "The long jump pit needs to face north-south," he'd insist. "Morning sun can blind the jumpers otherwise." Or, "We need more shade by the warm-up area. These kids will overheat in summer." Each recommendation reflected his deep understanding of both athletics and the practical needs of young athletes in Jamaica's climate and culture. 6 months in, the renovations were nearly complete. Modern synthetic track. Surfaces replaced cracked asphalt. Electronic timing systems supplanted handheld stopwatches. A modest but well-equipped gym occupied the space where Jenkins had once led stretching exercises using broomsticks in place of proper equipment. The official opening was scheduled for a Saturday, allowing maximum community participation. As dawn broke that morning, Jenkins stood alone on the freshly painted starting line, stopwatch in hand, a gift from Bolt, identical to the one he'd used decades earlier. "Some people would say you've spent millions on this project," the interviewer noted. "What do you consider the return on that investment?" Bolt glanced at Jenkins, who sat quietly beside him, before answering. "Coach saved me twice," he said. "First, when he showed me how to run properly as a kid. Then again, when finding him reminded me why I ran in the first place." He paused, collecting his thoughts. Some investments can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in lives changed, in purpose found. The interview took an unexpected turn when Jenkins, who had spoken little until that point, suddenly leaned forward. "There was a night under that overpass," he said, his voice steady but quiet, "when I decided it would be my last, that nobody would miss an old, failed coach." He looked directly at the camera. "If you're watching this and feeling the same way, know that your story isn't over. Your impact isn't finished." The revelation stunned viewers and prompted an outpouring of support for mental health initiatives. A documentary crew, moved by the interview, approached Bolt and Jenkins about telling their story through film. The resulting documentary, Starting Blocks, premiered at international film festivals, winning critical acclaim and further spreading the center's philosophy of second chances. As the center entered its second year, a visitor from the United Nations arrived to evaluate the program as a potential model for sports-based youth development initiatives worldwide. After 2 days of observation, the representative requested a private meeting with Bolt and Jenkins. "We've seen programs with better facilities or more advanced technology," the representative acknowledged. "But what you've created here, this connection between generations, this balance of excellence and accessibility, this is what sustainable development looks like in practice." The recognition led to an invitation to address the UN General Assembly, where Bolt spoke briefly before yielding the podium to Jenkins, symbolically passing the baton one more time. As Jenkins adjusted the microphone to his height, the hall fell silent. World leaders leaned forward to hear the once homeless coach whose redemption had inspired a movement. "A starting line is the most democratic place on earth," Jenkins began. "It doesn't care about your past or your bank account. It only asks, how hard are you willing to work for what comes next?" Back in Jamaica, as evening settled over the track, Jenkins found himself alone with Bolt after a long day of training. They sat in the bleachers, watching as maintenance staff prepared the facility for the next day's sessions. "Did you ever imagine this?" Bolt asked, gesturing toward the thriving center that had risen from abandonment. Jenkins considered the question, then shook his head slowly. "I trained athletes to see the finish line before they reached it," he admitted. "But this I couldn't have visualized." Bolt smiled, remembering countless training sessions on this same ground, when dreams of Olympic gold seemed impossible fantasies. "That's the thing about finish lines," he said, echoing words Jenkins had once told him. "You keep crossing one, only to find another waiting ahead." As they walked toward the exit, a group of young athletes arrived early for the next day's training. Eager to get additional practice, Jenkins checked his watch, the same stopwatch Bolt had given him, and made a quick decision. 15 minutes of extra work, he called to them, then home for proper rest. The children cheered, their enthusiasm undimmed by the day's earlier training. As they took positions on the track, Jenkins turned to Bolt. "This," he said simply, "is what no medal can measure." Bolt nodded, understanding completely. Together, They moved trackside, stopwatches in hand, ready to time the next generation of runners, and perhaps the next generation of believers. He clicked the watch, listening to its familiar tick. Memories washed over him, countless young athletes, their hopes and dreams measured in hundredths of seconds. Among them, a skinny boy with unprecedented natural talent but unrefined technique. A boy who became a legend. As the facility filled with people, local families, dignitaries, media, former athletes, Jenkins retreated to the background, uncomfortable with attention. But Bolt would not allow his mentor to hide. When the ceremonial ribbon was stretched across the track, Bolt called Jenkins forward. Together, they held oversized scissors, counting down in unison before making the cut that officially opened the center. The crowd erupted in cheers, many wiping away tears at the sight of teacher and student reunited in purpose. The day's highlight came when Bolt organized an impromptu race, not featuring elite athletes, but local children who had signed up for the center's first training program. 50 young runners, ages 8 to 15, lined up in their new uniforms, faces tight with concentration. Jenkins, at Bolt's insistence, called them to their marks and started the race with a whistle. As the children sprinted with raw, unpolished enthusiasm, Bolt and Jenkins stood side by side at the finish line, stopwatches in hand, completing a circle that had begun decades earlier on the same ground. When the final runner crossed the line, Bolt wrapped an arm around his former coach's shoulders. The gesture, simple but profound, was captured in a photograph that would eventually hang in the center's main hall, a testament to the power of belief, second chances, and coming home. 1 year after its grand opening, the Speed and Hope Training Center had exceeded even Bolt's ambitious vision. What began as a redemption story for one coach had evolved into a model program that attracted attention from sports authorities worldwide. The center's initial enrollment of 50 local children had quadrupled. 3 additional coaches joined, Jenkins implementing his training philosophy while bringing their own expertise. Weekend competitions drew participants from across Jamaica, and a satellite facility had opened in Montego Bay, with plans for 3 more in underserved communities. Most remarkably, the center operated on a pay-what-you-can basis, ensuring that financial limitations never prevented talented youth from accessing quality training. Those who could afford full fees subsidized those who couldn't, creating a sustainable model that preserved dignity for all participants. Jenkins, now residing in a modest apartment near the facility, arrived each morning before sunrise. A habit, unchanged since his earlier coaching days. His health had stabilized, his confidence restored. Though still uncomfortable with personal recognition, he had accepted his role as the center's heart and soul. The transformations go beyond physical training, observed an educational psychologist who volunteered at the center. These children develop discipline, goal-setting skills, and resilience that transfer to their academic performance and personal lives. The most tangible evidence came in the form of Marcus Dunbar, a 14-year-old from Spanish Town who had been sleeping on his grandmother's floor when he joined the program. Within 8 months, Marcus shattered the national youth record for the 200-meter dash, a record previously held by a teenage Usain Bolt. After his victory, Marcus sought out Jenkins rather than the waiting media. Cameras captured their embrace as the boy whispered something in the coach's ear that made the normally stoic man visibly emotional. Later, when pressed by reporters, Jenkins reluctantly shared the boy's words. He said, "I gave him a lane when he thought the race was already over." The impact extended beyond sports. Local schools reported improved attendance and academic performance among children enrolled at the center. Juvenile crime rates in surrounding neighborhoods showed modest but measurable decreases. Corporate partners, seeing the program's success, increased their support, allowing for scholarship programs and nutritional supplements for participants who needed them. Bolt and Jenkins documented this journey in a collaborative memoir titled Second Wind: Finding Victory Beyond the Finish Line. The book became an international bestseller, with proceeds funding expansions of the program. Though reluctant to participate in publicity, Jenkins found his voice when speaking about the center's mission rather than his personal story. During a rare television interview marking the center's first anniversary, the interviewer asked Bolt about the financial investment he had made.